everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Annika Tabochnik. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the Creative Aging Program Associate here at BIMA, and I'll be co-facilitating this panel today along with Vaughn Wolf. But before we begin, I would like to signpost to some other things that are happening at the museum. We have a few spots available for the Artful Herbalist Workshop with Anne Lovejoy, which runs from 1 to 3:30 today. This workshop will explore modern and traditional uses for garden herbs and flowers. Admission is $75 for members and $95 for non-members. And if you're interested in attending, you can find Kristen here after the panel.
Scholarships are available, just talk to me.
We also have 3 exhibits currently on show. Corey Bennett Anderson's Heroes downstairs, Rootbound in our artist book room, and Project 42 by Molly Vaughn upstairs. Project 42 will likely be referenced in our discussion today as it memorializes the lives of murdered transgender and gender nonconforming people, particularly trans women of color. And it shares a strong connection to traditions of remembrance in the transgender community. The 42 in Project 42 references the average length of a trans person's life, something you may consider in the context of this panel, whose participants span identities, experiences, and ages. And I encourage those of you who have not seen this show to go visit, and those of you who have to perhaps revisit it, particularly in the spirit of Trans Day of Remembrance. After our discussion, we'll have time for a brief Q&A, after which we'll invite those of you who have volunteered to come to the front of the auditorium and read the statement of remembrance that you have on your card. And as we consider questions of remembrance through the lens of the trans community and the violence this community faces and continues to face, I invite you to extend this reflection on who is remembered, who is not, and how this both upholds and obscures violence to its many intersections, particularly an acknowledgement that the land on which we gather today is within the Aboriginal territory of the Suquamish people who continue to live along Washington's Central Salish Sea as they have for thousands of years. I'm honored to be a part of this panel, and particularly for this opportunity for intergenerational connection. And with that, I would like to invite the other panelists to briefly introduce themselves. Eve, if you'd like to start.
Excuse me. I'm Eve Pillay. I'm a transgender woman. I use she and her. I am on the boards of Rainbow Crew Northwest and Bainbridge Pride, and part of a number of trans community and support groups on this side of the water. Thank you.
My name, is my mic working? Or is that, okay. My name is Jaden. My pronouns are she, her. And my connection is I live on Bainbridge Island and I go to Eagle Harbor High School. I think I've been living on the island for about almost 9 years. So, yeah.
My name is Rowan Drury. My pronouns are they, them. I grew up on Bainbridge, and now I live in rural Kitsap County.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vaughn Wolf. I use he, him pronouns. I live in Bremerton, but currently work in Gig Harbor. I am currently the board president of Rainbow Crew Northwest, sit on the board with Eve. I have a history serving LGBTQ communities, and currently I'm the community engagement director of Prison Pet Partnership, which provides reentry programming to incarcerated individuals at Washington Correction Center for Women.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here. And to start us off today, I would like to ask about Trans Day of Remembrance. When we met earlier this week as just to check in prior to the panel. We talked a little bit about how the trans representation we see in greater society is so often focused on tragedy. But for many of us, Trans Day of Remembrance sits apart from this narrative. So I'm just wondering what the significance of Trans Day of Remembrance is to all of you, or does it even feel significant? And maybe Eve, if you'd like to.
Okay, I'm going to give you the briefest history of it, which is in 1989, just after the murder of Matthew Shepard, the young gay man in Wyoming, got so much attention and mourning and recognition around the country. There was a trans woman named Rita Hester who was murdered in the Boston area. And people realized that no, there was no public outcry for that murder. And the trans community started to had a vigil for Rita, and then added on the names of other people that they had heard about, that they could find, that they could dig into all the different feeds around the world to find trans women, trans people who had been murdered around the world. This led into a slowly growing national movement. And the first time I even heard of the Trans Day of Remembrance was just 6 years ago. And the first one I went to was just trans people, was just 3 of us reading the names, and there was hundreds of names from around the world, to the other 8 people who were there at Evergreen Park in Bremerton. And those other 8 people started to react to all these names because they just heard name after name after name with some bitterness, some resentment, mourning certainly, sadness certainly. And it was a beautiful ceremony, and we put paper boats out onto the water, little, environmentally correct paper boats with, that memorialized those people. And then I went to the Port Townsend version of the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which I sometimes say is TDOR, and sometimes I pronounce as TDOR because I think it's a door to understanding. And that up there, they held it inside in a church that was open to everyone. It wasn't a service, but it was just open to everybody in the community. And like we'll be doing today, later, people each had a name to read from a card. And the difference for me there was that felt like such a welcoming of those spirits who had so little welcome in their lives, that became incredibly important to me, to have this be more of a welcoming than a vigil. To recognize we are bringing their spirits forth, which is actually exactly what Molly says about what she is doing with her community of dresses that are up on the 2nd floor. It is bringing those spirits a sense of welcome, a sense of life. So that's what it means to me.
I think that as Trans Day of Remembrance is becoming more known to everyone, even though it's most likely still a small day that most people don't know about, I still think it is growing and more people are starting to know about it. And the significance to me is it reflects on how far trans people and allies have come to helping themselves. And I think even though there have been many murders and assaults around trans people, there's definitely been some great history made. And I guess just anything surrounding how brave trans people are for being themselves and being able to talk about it, because I know there's definitely a lot of people who just try and hide it. I know that was me before I came out publicly. And just, it's not really about just celebrating the people who are out and present in the trans community, but also those who are still questioning and those who know about it and can't say it because they're not welcome in their own community. And I hope that eventually that changes, because it's not something to be afraid of.
I think the Trans Day of Remembrance for me is a day to bring light to those people whose deaths really are very hushed in our society. If you have a card after the panel, I would encourage you to try to read up on the person whose name is on that card. Many of you will find it is incredibly difficult to find any information on them, especially anyone. These individuals died this year, but especially if you look into those who have died 10, 15 years ago, there's really no information, or that information that is there may be incorrect either in their gender, their name. It is really difficult to honor those who have died either as a trans person or because they're a trans person. And I think this day is about shedding light on those people and honoring them in the best way possible.
I first want to acknowledge that we've gotten 3 different perspectives here on the feelings and perspectives of TDOR. And it's incredibly important to understand the history. It's incredibly important to understand that this is not a day that trans people want to spend mourning. They do want to celebrate the lives of these folks, but it is and can be still very hard to go through such a day. For me personally, TDOR is incredibly important, and it is significant because it simply can't not be significant. When you do look at the list of folks who have been murdered on that list, if you pay attention enough, you'll notice that there is a pattern of who it is actually. And most of the people on that list are trans women of color, most of them Black trans women. And so that's incredibly important for me because it tells me where we are still lacking and where we need to start paying attention more. I sit up here and I sit thinking that I'm in an immense position of privilege. I get to walk day to day, and if I don't want to think about it or, not consider it something important to me, I can do that. But looking at that list, I feel guilt if I were to do that. I can't not ignore something like that. So the date is incredibly important. It is a reminder of how much work still needs to be done. And Rowan, you're right. We don't know much about the folks when we read those names, and there's so many more folks who don't make it on that list because we didn't know they were trans, or their family didn't know, or perhaps they were labeled incorrectly in their gender. And so there's even a longer list of folks that we don't know that never make it on that list.
Yeah, something that that I know that Eve has said is just sort of your joy and appreciation that there even is a list that you can go to that where some, at least some people are recognized in their passing, and that you can find that information. Sort of moving on from this idea of remembrance to more of a focus on our joy and our personal individual experiences. I'd just like to invite you all to share something you feel that you have gained or that has brought you joy as part of your trans experience or transition.
Okay, we'll start with you.
Okay, I can start with me. Well, I think probably the thing that I feel like I've gained, which I have a feeling will be echoed in some of your responses, has to do with how I'm able to connect with other people. And for me, my experience with my gender identity has a lot to do with honoring the ways that I have always felt uncomfortable or not understood how other people move through the world in relation to their gender, and letting myself sort of just do my own thing and not try to like shoehorn myself into understanding those things. And I feel like in doing that, I have been able to understand other people and their individual nuanced connections to their gender and what that means to them in a much deeper way.
Somebody over there.
Eve wants to co-moderate this, I think. I think for me, I've sat with this question for a long time because there is so much that I think has brought me joy and comfort throughout the transition. And I think that's just understanding that I have either naturally have acquired or just because of my experience have gained an incredible sense of empathy for folks. And I think that's because once upon a time previous to my transition, up until my 20s, I was perceived as a woman. So I lived life as a woman, being perceived as a woman. That is the only life I knew. And then transitioning into now being perceived as a man without question comes with a very different experience. And although we can have conversations about what those differences are, I can say that I've actually lived those differences. And it is so empowering, I suppose, to be able to say, not only can we have these conversations, but I can actually apply my lived experience to these conversations to better explain those differences as to how they come about. And so I guess it makes it so much easier to navigate conversations about gender, the differences of gender, the similarities of gender, and what people are experiencing, and them trying to get it over as in, yes, and I want to fight for it. I'm over here like, I totally understand what you're experiencing. I experienced that. I totally understand what you're experiencing too. I'm experiencing that right now, so I get it. And it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to have both of those experiences and apply it. So that gives me a lot of joy because I think that it makes it easier to connect with people regardless of their gender and their experiences.
I can go next. Being non-binary, there are specific challenges that go with that don't supersede that of being binarily trans, but are certainly different. I think I have gained a lot of introspection skills. If you are, a trans woman or a trans man, there are a lot of norms that go with that. You will start taking hormones, or you will change the way you dress. And that certainly doesn't need to be the case, but those guidelines are there for those who want to utilize them. Being non-binary, there's a lot of choosing your own path. There's certainly not now, and hopefully not ever, so that people still can choose their own path. There's not a set of norms that define what a non-binary person is and what they look like, what they experience. And so being able to look into myself and figure out how I want to live, how I want to be myself, and what feels best in that is certainly a skill I've gained, being able to listen to myself.
I guess I'll go. I guess the main part of transitioning isn't mainly about just being the other gender or being non-binary or some other gender than how you were born. but I think it's also an opportunity to kind of change other things about yourself. I've definitely taken that chance to reflect on just the things I don't like about myself. And even though there's some things that I'm not going to like about myself and that I can't really change them, I still think that transitioning has kind of helped me just be more of myself outside of being trans. And so I think another thing about my transition that's helped is that I don't really know how to word this. It's kind of like I've been more confident, I guess. And now that I'm more confident, I've definitely noticed I'm less shy than I were. I used to be shy to the point where you couldn't even hear me talk. Of course, I'm probably being really shy right now.
You're up on a stage.
It's true.
I think that outside of negativity, realizing how much you can change definitely helps with the realization of being trans. So it's definitely really hard to transition, but in the end, you look back on how far you've come and you realize how much you've changed into the person that you were meant to be. And it just makes you feel really great about yourself.
Yeah, what they said. That's wonderful. Both of you and all of you, because this is always the learning to me at every time I get to talk to other trans people and people under the trans umbrella. For me, when I came out, I had a conversation with my favorite cousin, and I was her favorite cousin. And we ended up talking about, I asked for honest curiosity, and she just said, okay, I'm going to give you honest curiosity. She said, do you wear heels? And I had to get some heels because I had to see if I could wear them. Then I decided I didn't have to. I'm 6'3", I don't need them. But we ended up having a conversation about her and what she had gone through growing up. That was a deeper conversation that we had ever had. And in the middle of this conversation, I was just thinking to myself, oh my God, this is worth it. This is worth it. I am actually connecting with, my favorite cousin in a way I've never been able to connect before. And it didn't have anything to do with clothes. It didn't have anything to do with hormones. It didn't have anything to do with anything else. I had lived my life with this hesitation, this doubt all my life that I had managed pretty well, but I'd come to a point where I couldn't manage it anymore. And for me, just like what Annika was saying, is I can actually connect with people now better than I could because I'm more connected with myself. And I believe that if you want to know anybody, you have to let yourself be known. And being willing to do that vulnerability was being able to express that was just changed my life more than anything else.
I wanted to comment too, Eve, thank you for that. And one thing I kind of picked up from this conversation is that although we have our different perspectives, one thing I hear, not just folks up here talking about, but trans people in general talking about how, especially binary trans folks, where there might be some expectations, right? Where, they're supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And as we move through this journey, it's less and less about gender and more about like just who am I? And perhaps, yes, gender is part of that journey and has sparked that journey, but I find that a lot of trans people, as they go through transition, are really just trying to figure out who they are as a whole person, because their identity prior to that was so defined about gender, yet that was something that didn't sit correct. It just didn't sit right. And so having to navigate that kind of forces you to also navigate other things within yourself that you didn't really expect, but you're having to because you're trying to be authentic with yourself while also trying to be authentic with other people. And you're forced into a position of being authentic if you choose to come out as a trans person and to be out and to really demand that you are called who you are and that you are referred to as who you are. And so it puts you in that position of having to be authentic, and that can be really difficult. But what's cool about that is that more and more, I know at least for me personally, I deconstruct the concept of gender. And really, it's just I'm a person trying to figure out who I am, and I'm trying to connect with other people. And that's all it is. And that's all names and pronouns are to me. When I hear a name or I hear a pronoun, that's that person. And I want to connect genuinely with that person. I think that's all the community really wants to do, is understand themselves and have genuine connections with each other and with other people. And that can be a scary thing to do sometimes, to step into that, because that's a lot of vulnerability. That's a lot of questioning. That's a lot of navigation. And, but once you step into it, that confidence grows, right? And you're like, wow, this was scary at first, but this feels right. This feels good. This feels better. And you kind of just keep taking steps until you feel better and better. And it's a really unique and cool feeling. So I appreciate everybody's perspectives on that for sure.
And I just want to say that when I said that things change and I'm always learning things, 5 years ago, if I met a person who said they were they, them, non-binary in some way, in my mind, I would have said, okay, yeah, you're in a holding pattern right now, but you'll decide. And right now, listening, what Rowan was saying was just really helpful. What Annika is saying is just really helpful. It's just like, oh, it made me break down my binary. And so that I'm saying, oh no, they're just non-gender, they're just they, them. They're not on their way to something else. They're just on their way to being themselves. Mm-hmm. And Jaden, who I admire beyond what she can understand, because Jaden represents, an opportunity I didn't give myself. And I'll be really clear, I'm not blaming my parents, the society, anything else. Most of all, who I couldn't come out to was myself. And the idea that Jaden can do this gives me such joy.
Thank you.
I think this is something we can talk about how as a society, our understanding of what it means to be transgender, or even that is something that exists, how that's changed over time. I know that just in each of our lifetimes as individuals, I'm sure that has changed quite a bit, as you're saying, Eve. Even just your personal view of things has changed over a short amount of time. And I'm curious if what all of you have noticed changed about how other people or society understands what it means to be transgender and how that's affected you.
I'd love to hear you all comment first as young folks up here, honestly. I think your perspective would really help us understand what it is right now for you and what that means to you now.
Sorry, what was that?
So yeah, do you want to repeat?
Yeah,
the question?
I can also just
You go first.
I can start out with this one. I guess I'm young-ish.
No ish there, you're young.
It's all in contrast. I know that in my life, obviously, for a good portion of my life, I did not know what non-binary was. I did not know that that was an option. And it certainly wasn't something that other people around me understood. I do sometimes have those like thinking back on things type of memories of where I think just what if this had been something that I knew about or that other people around me understood when I was a kid, what would it have meant to have the language to actually express how I was feeling? Because I can remember trying, and I know that that's not the same. Not everyone has that experience. We all come to our own individual relationships with our gender identity and what that means to us in different ways. But even just like meeting someone else who knew what it meant when I said that I was non-binary, that had a really like tangible effect on me, because at least in my experience with that, it's like, what comes up if you Google like, I don't feel like a boy or a girl, like your results are going to vary wildly based on, even just in years. And the likelihood of people having some understanding and also being open to have like a person-to-person conversation about that instead of responding in a way that maybe was based in curiosity, but also like a certain level of like prove-it-ness. That has changed a lot over my life.
Yeah, to piggyback on what Annika said, I think, sorry, Annika. In the last even 2-3 years, the number of people who know what I mean when I say that my pronouns are they, them, and not having to explain that has been a big thing. I have never felt ashamed of who I am, but I have kind of consistently had no interest in trying to explain to people who didn't know what non-binary meant, what that means. And that has been the biggest barrier to my coming out to many people, family, friends, people that I have worked with. And so that change, that shift has been incredibly important, both in our community and to me personally. And that's kind of the biggest thing. I guess the other thing I was going to say is that I hear many of my friends talk about the moment they learned about gay people or the moment they learned about trans people, and I count myself lucky that was never a thing for me. Most of the people that were closest to me when I was younger, my parents' friends and aunts and uncles were gay or trans. And so that's never been a thing I had to learn about. That was just always the way it was. And so I think when I was younger, learning that other people didn't grow up that way was really interesting. Hearing people say, "Oh, this gay thing," or "This is weird. This is weird," and I'm like, "No, it's not." And so watching that shift, even if it's not society's shift, but my shift in understanding of how society views the LGBTQ community, has been a vast learning experience for me.
I think definitely over time, as I've transitioned or come to the realization that I'm trans, I've definitely learned more about just it's like I met a new person, but it was like two people in like I was two people and I was meeting the other person, and I was the person who was just like acting like a different person and I didn't even know it. So I think as I kind of lived with this realization, I had realized that I was trans, but I didn't really know what to do. So I just kind of like ignored it and like, I don't know, just kind of threw that thought in the trash. And it just kept coming back. I couldn't get rid of it. And so I was just like, okay, I'm trans. I'm not going to do anything about it though. And that isn't the right thing to do, because even if you can't do anything about it, the good thing to do is not like, I don't know, just don't push it away, even if you can't do anything about it, even if you're not in a supportive area. I think even the smallest things, if you haven't transitioned, the smallest things help tremendously in the early stages of realization. So I'm really thankful that I grew up in a supportive community, and I can't really speak from the experience of what it was like for people who were not in the same position as me, but I just really wish I could help those people. And even though sometimes I can't help them, even if I were there for them, I think that just doing small things that no one's going to notice or no one will call you out for, those things have really helped me in the past. So maybe it's like, I don't know, if you don't want facial hair and you're starting to grow facial hair and you notice it, but it's not noticeable to others, maybe, well, correctly shave it, use like the correct tools for it or something like that. I noticed that made me feel a lot better. Except my mom noticed that I used a razor, and so she was like, you can just ask me for one, you know? And I'm like, okay, sure. But things like wearing like short socks or like slightly more feminine or masculine shoes, or I mean not shoes, clothes, that really helps. Just things that don't make you uncomfortable. Try your best to use that to your advantage. And I honestly can't remember if that was on topic or not. So
Everything
It was
we talk about here
wonderful.
is on topic.
It was wonderful. And it was on topic. And
okay, good.
I need to go back to what Annika said and point out that I am certifiably not young. And this question, I just don't know where to begin with this question, because it's like giving you a list. I said, I remember when Renee Richards came out as trans, and nobody here knows, or few of these people know who Renee Richards was. She was a tennis player. I remember Flip Wilson doing Geraldine on his show. I remember the first time I saw Some Like It Hot and saying, "Oh, wait a second, why am I really connecting with this?" I remember when Ingersoll Center, Marsha Botzer's longest running trans group in the country, was separate between those who were transsexual and those who were cross-dressers or anything else. And unless to be transsexual, you had to be getting every bit of surgery. And that was, again, the times had been really, everybody denying a binary will create another binary, and I'm guilty of that as much as anybody else. Where things are today, it's Caitlyn Jenner comes out, Chaz Bono is out, Elliot's last name,
Page.
Elliot Page is out. And my real curiosity about Elliot Page is like, so are you still going to be on the Umbrella Academy? Because I'd like you there. The differences are so huge, and they are coming faster and faster that I'm kind of in awe. And I do want to say one other thing, though, is that not to bring this back to the negative, but some of the trans deaths that we're going to be talking about later is, there's a lot more trans men who are being murdered. There's trans youth that are being murdered. And as much as I want to look at the positive growth that we've had, the vitriol that is in the public arena right now is causing these deaths. And so, there's a huge amount of resistance that before was always hidden. And I just want to at least acknowledge that.
Visibility, it brings the bad with the good.
I think I'm in the middle of everybody. I'm assuming. We shouldn't make assumptions, but I'm assuming that. Very quickly, as far as my perception, because I know we're getting a little low on time, but I come from a military family. So growing up, I didn't have language. And I'll just age myself right now. I'm 30. So growing up, I didn't have access to that, but my household was very open to, respect people, always have empathy, treat people how you want to be treated. And I took that to heart. So both my parents grew up in San Francisco, and they talked a lot about Castro Street and the LGBTQ community and how cool it was down there. And my mom talked about this really cool trans woman one time at a bus stop, protected her from this creepy guy that was following her one day. And that was my introduction to transgender people. But she didn't call the person a transgender person. She called her she, her, but explained that it was a man that was dressed up as a woman. And so that was the language that was given to me. I had no opinion on it. It just, there's people that like to dress in other clothing. Cool. However, for me, myself, the struggle came as I came into development, going through puberty. And so I always dressed masculinely. My mom loved to try and get dresses on me, and I would throw them off. Absolutely not. She cried when I asked her to finally cut my hair. And so that has always been a core thing with me, but it wasn't until development that I actually noticed that there was something different and something that I started to characterize as wrong. And that wrongness came from, and I'm just gonna be very, very transparent, is that when I started to develop breasts, I immediately thought, I hope I get breast cancer because I do not want these things. And having that kind of dialogue as a child can be very confusing. And I remember thinking, I can't tell anybody this. I can't, because if I tell somebody, they're going to think there's something wrong with me. And then I'm going to have to go to the hospital. And so there was just this train of thoughts going through my head. Okay, I'm going to have to keep the secret. And I thought, okay, maybe I'm just experiencing something weird. And then when I grow up, it'll just go away. Well, I grew up and it didn't go away. I remember being 20 years old and thinking, I still have this feeling about myself and I can't place why I have it. I don't know why. I don't know why I have an issue with it, but it won't go away. I still don't want to go to the doctor. Maybe I should Google. And that's what I did. I moved out of my parents' house, was in college, doing everything on my own. I thought, you know what, I'm going to figure this out because this is obviously a problem that I've had since I was a child. And so I'm going to figure out what's going on. And I Googled it. I Googled, I don't want my breasts anymore. And things started popping up. And then the word transgender popped up. And then I thought, oh gosh, am I transgender? No, that can't be it. There's got to be something else going on. Impossible. No one's ever talked to me about this before. But I then went on this thing of just listening to people's stories. YouTube became my best friend because then I could actually go on there and see people talk about what they were feeling. And I'll never forget, because this YouTube channel doesn't even exist anymore, but it was a YouTube channel, and I'll never forget his name. His name was Jet Black. And he got on there and he said, I'm pretty sure I'm transgender. I'm going to start my transition today and I'm going to document it. And that was the first video. He had a certain look about him. He went on hormones, and 5 videos later, he had all of this masculine shape in his body and his face. And I was like, you can get stuff for that? What? Why hasn't anyone ever brought this up to me before? I want that. And it was a trip watching this person and even talk about how he felt about his body and talk about the feelings that he had. I was like, that's what I've been feeling. This is me. This is my story. I'm not weird. I'm not the weirdo here. And it was so validating. And I think about, Annika, what you said when you talk about when you finally have someone who understands and uses that language and goes, yes, me too. You know, I'm non-binary, or I'm transgender, or I have felt these things. Gosh, it really brings you out of that isolation. And today, seeing people talk about it, seeing youth talk about it, and it be so normalized, and seeing people have these conversations on the internet like it's nothing, it trips me out because I had to go and look for that information because I was feeling things. And now it makes me happy. I'm a little envious too, but it makes me happy because, gosh, if I had that language as a kid, or if I knew that this was a thing and it was normal, then that would have helped me out at that time. It would have helped me not feel so isolated and weird compared to everybody else around me, because I couldn't relate to anybody. No one had these feelings around me, not my friends, not my family. My family was cool with gay people. I said transgender and they're like, what? What's that? You know? And so my family was very accepting and affirming. They needed some time to get on board with it because they didn't really understand. But again, that's a privilege of mine of having a supportive family in that. But yeah, it's really, again, cool to see that people are having these conversations, because I think about, gosh, like if I had that, I do wonder if I would have started earlier. I do wonder if I would have had a lot more confidence as a kid, because I struggled with that. There wasn't a lot of things I struggled with as a kid. That was one of them. And it was one I struggled with in silence for most of my young life. So
I think that transitions really nicely into just spend a moment, like briefly talking about what our hopes are for what growing up as a trans person will look like in the future. And I think sort of echoing what Vaughn was saying, for me, that really has to do with my hope for just everyone being able to have their own personal relationship to their gender, their own experience of that, and being able to decide what that means for them at their own pace, and whatever the outcomes may be, without feeling like there's only 2 options, or there's only 3 options, or etc. There's all different ways to be, and as we all know, what it means to be a man or a woman or not is an individual thing, and none of us have a completely shared experience of that. So.
I think that, is it okay if I go? All right.
Please.
I have a different experience of what I expect the future to look like, what I would like the future to look like. Because for me, we grew up where nobody was trans, that or with a very narrow definition of trans, that, and where I remember definitely reading an article, because I looked in the library as much as I could because we didn't have Google, but I could look in a library and find really weird textbooks, and it would they had to mark off we're talking about these transsexual these men who want to be women, because the number of women who want to be men is such a small thing. And they said want, not who'd identify or anything like that. If affirmation was never part of it, confirmation was never part of it. It was all weird paraphiliacs. They said with absolute certainty it could not be more than 0.0001% of the population, of the female population, had any question about their gender. For me, I can make this really brief. What do I, see in the future? I feel I'm on the stage with 4 parts of the future already, all of whom are unimaginable to me 20 years ago. So, I've got a lot of confidence in the future just because I literally just have to look around.
I think that I know that there have been I can't actually speak from experience, but I know that long ago, there was just absolutely no documentation or known history surrounding trans people. I think that that's definitely changed. Trans people have been acknowledged for sure. They're maybe not in certain parts of the world, but we're getting there. It feels really empowering to know that people like me and the 4 other people here are just everywhere, and there's nothing we can change about that. So why should we try and push that away? Why should we hate the people that are making history and making good history? There's nothing negative. We're not turning kids trans. It's they come to their own realization. And whether that's all on their own or if it's based off of other people, making them come to that realization, I think that it's not going to stop happening, and it's not a bad thing at all to realize more about yourself. So I hope for in the future that this just keeps happening. We're on a pretty good start. There are some as the acceptance rises, there's definitely going to be some more backlash, but I'm pretty confident that we can help prevent hate from being in trans people's lives, or at least not as often, because I know that there's so many people who have to deal with hate like pretty often. So yeah, that's my hope.
I can't think of a better way to end than that.
I think the only thing I would say is that I love people expressing themselves. And the liberation of trans people means a liberation for all people, including people who are cisgender. And that's because trans people challenge gender construct and the societal systems that we exist in. I mean, I this whole time, it's funny, and I think it's interesting for me. I've been looking at everybody's shoes on stage, and everybody's wearing a different shoe. And then my eye automatically goes to Eve's socks. They're very expressive. But that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, it's cool to see people's personalities, because we do express ourselves through what we do, what we wear. And that's all trans people are doing, is that they're trying to let people know who they are. And I think that's something that cisgender people take for granted, that cisgender people can exist in a world and you conform to a society. And I think trans people are just like, we just like colors and clothes and just want to be us, you know? And that empowers people who are not trans to do the same thing. And I would love to see a future where, instead of focusing on transness, which transness is of course critical and important, we need to talk about it. But at the end of the day, I want to see people walking around feeling confident, feeling okay and safe to express themselves however they want, because you're getting to see who they are. I mean, I think of workplaces and how we all have to dress a certain way in a workplace, right? We're all performing according to our environment, and trans people are not performing. We're being who we are. We're trying to, again, be authentic with ourselves and be authentic with other people. And that's a type of liberation that I love seeing with other folks, whether they're trans or not. If they're expressing themselves, I'm like, yes, I want to see that expression. I want people to express themselves. Let kids try on gender. Let them throw on different colored clothing, different types of clothing. Let them try out they, them, he, him, she, her, other pronouns. Are they going to change it tomorrow? Maybe, maybe not. What if they change it 5 years from now? That's okay. It's their journey. And I've gone through my own transformations. I've changed how I identify, because it's a journey to find out who you are and to kind of deconstruct that in a society that tries to tell you who you are. And that takes a lot of inner work. And when we can do that kind of work, it is a form of liberation. I think it's inspiring to see trans people get up there and continue doing inner work. And, you know, people always ask, well, what if it's a phase? Well, then it'll phase out and they'll choose a new pronoun and then we adjust with that. You know, it really don't have to make it a big deal. It's okay for people to change clothes, to change names, to change pronouns. All we have to do is respect that and affirm that. And that's cool. It's a cool thing to do. So I hope to see that as we move into the future, that people can just be who they are and feel safe to be who they are.
Thank you for that. And we have the time to open it up to maybe one or two brief questions, if there's anything.
This is less a question and more a continuation of what Vaughn started, and a reflection on listening to Alok Menon this morning, who's if any of you want somebody who's an incredible poet, speaker, visionary in the trans community, look up Alok Menon. But they were talking about allyship, and I think it's a really lovely continuation of what you all have said, that allyship really is not about what you can do, but being vulnerable along with and vulnerability specifically as a word meaning or coming from the root of wound, and being willing to step into sharing the challenges and the wounding together so that there can be healing. I just found that to be a really lovely, positive naming this morning. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's really important
Mhm.
because I think vulnerability is key to the trans experience. And people who will feel vulnerable with us, not for us, is wonderful. I think that's an excellent definition of allyship.
Yes.
Hi. I thought it was really cool to hear some of the trans heroes that have come out in the media over the years. And I thought of my childhood, Dr. Wendy Carlos. That was such a huge deal in the 1970s. Are there any media, TV shows, podcasts, or anything that get it right for you that like you saw your experience or an authentic experience maybe reflected in a TV show or movie or something? Can you recommend anything like that?
Can I ask you, because I've got really bad hearing, and I want to make sure, because I thought you said Wendy Carlos.
Yes, I did.
You are the only other person in this room who knows who Wendy Carlos is. Okay?
She's a hero because of her music. It's just amazing.
Well, yeah, and I think that Wendy Carlos is a good example of how people get disappeared if they come out. Because Wendy Carlos had one of the best-selling albums of the 1970s, which was late 60s, early 70s, which was Switched on Bach, which was her playing Bach through a Moog synthesizer. If you want to know where the first popular electronic music was, that was Wendy Carlos. Wendy Carlos went on to help Stanley Kubrick do the soundtrack for Clockwork Orange. Wendy Carlos announced that she was trans and didn't get any more movie scores and didn't get any major record deals after that. So, in a sense, I don't have a hero like Wendy Carlos, though I was really aware of her when I could be, because it was years later that I even found out that that's what had happened. I don't know. I mean, to me, the song lyrics, Lola, Holly, and Take a Walk on the Wild Side. These Sweet Loretta Martin. These are just these little keys for music. I didn't have any heroes. I didn't have any role models, and you guys, you all might have something different.
I think that if there's any like genre of music or like movie actor for a specific style of movie, there might be a transgender or non-binary person who is in that field, who is very popular or something like that, because I know that there are a lot of trans people nowadays who just kind of blend in with cisgender people in their experience fields. That probably wasn't, like you said with Wendy Carlos, did I pronounce that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I recognize that name. And I think I've heard that a long time ago. But there were just no like names like that who were like out as trans or non-binary or even just part of the LGBTQ because of that exact reason. They would be shut down and shut out of their area of expertise and they would have to go find something else. Nowadays, we have more acceptance. So there have been more people coming forward about it. Like there was Elliot Page. Okay. I'm bad at remembering last names, even first ones, but where they're accepted now. And so there's also smaller creators, actors, musicians, like that. I've definitely noticed there's a lot of trans people who are just out there and sometimes you don't even know they're trans because they're just accepted nowadays. And so I think if you just search for whatever you're interested in and then like something related to being trans, you might be able to find some sort of artist, musician, whatever it is that you're looking for, who is a good person to look up to. I don't know if I worded that correctly, but
You did.
okay. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there who are out nowadays, and I think that's just that's not gonna change. It's only gonna be a larger amount of people as they feel more open.
I was just going to recommend Pose.
Who?
Pose, the TV show.
Oh, okay.
If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. There are trans people, trans actors that are playing trans people in that TV show. And it is directed by a trans woman of color as well. So there's a lot of intention that's put into it. Yeah, it is something fun to watch, but you also get a lot of personal perspectives of real struggles that challenge the community, and not just the trans community, but the queer community as a whole as well. It is set in San Francisco as well. So I highly recommend that if you haven't heard of it. I think that's one of the most positive TV shows out there, and more of the more realistic perspectives, and because it's by trans people and there's trans actors in it.
Well, I think we'll move on to.
Well, I got a question. One here.
Yeah.
If we're moving on, before we leave this, do we count Prince as trans? Non-gender, non-binary?
I don't think that Prince counted himself as trans, so I would probably say no.
Okay.
I think Prince was doing some interesting things with gender and the expectations around that, but I don't feel like I can speak like in depth about Prince.
I think it's fair to say
RIP.
because he's not here, we don't know.
Yeah.
We know what he said and how he expressed himself. And I am curious that if he were here today, if that language would change. But yeah, we don't know. But it's fun to think about as far as people
I
having
didn't
access
think
to
that,
language.
yes, Prince was trans. No, I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that Prince played with gender in a really public way.
Mm-hmm.
And
he did
may
say
have had
that.
an impact on trans movements without necessarily identifying Prince self as trans.
And I think that there's a lot of people throughout history who, we can only speculate about how someone might identify in the context of our society today, but there's definitely lots of people who are having, their individual experiences and expressions of gender in ways that have affected all of us.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to invite those of you who have a card in remembrance. We'll put a mic at the front of the auditorium. I just want to thank everyone who's here for being on this panel. maybe before we leave the stage, if you just wanted to say a few words about Trans Day of Remembrance, Eve, to kick us off.
Oh, about what people are going to read
Yes.
and what you're going to hear. I will say it over and again. For me, this is more than a vigil. This is a welcoming. For me, the murders of trans people around the world, and today we're only reading from the United States in the last year, doesn't mean that we are special or above what has gone on in Yemen, what goes on with the Uyghurs, what goes on with the Rohingya, what goes on everywhere in the world with violence towards women. We do not claim any special status here, but we, around the world, there are these murders. We, around the world, do not want to be considered different or considered special, but our visibility offers a way to welcome all of those who have had or have right now so little welcome in their lives, or too little welcome. So that's, so please read these as a welcoming of their spirits more than as a vigil for them.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you.